Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Cassie. I am the Evil Secret Ninja, and I talk about book-related things on my channel. So today I am doing my review of The Wheel of Time. So as any fantasy person knows, The Wheel of Time is the 14-book monstrosity that was started by Robert Jordan and finished by Brandon Sanderson after Robert Jordan's death. There's also a show coming out on Amazon at the end of the year, and I am looking forward to that. I want to see how they kind of interpret certain things in the book. So the first book in The Wheel of Time is The Eye of the World, and this was I believe this was written that started in the 1990s, and the last book is A Memory of Light. And obviously, this was the one that was finished by Brandon Sanderson, and that was finished in 2012. So you have pretty much like 3 decades of writing and 3 decades of working through, trying to get through these books. Now, I love The Wheel of Time. And I won't say that I love like everything about it, but I don't think anyone can say that they love everything about a series or a certain book. You know, we always have something like, well, this could have been done a little bit better. Obviously, when everyone knows, like, there's a part in The Wheel of Time as you're reading those books that it kind of slows down a little bit, and well, it slows down a lot, and you're just reading and reading and reading and expecting something to happen, and chapter after chapter, nothing is. And obviously they call that like the slog. It's a real thing. It's a real thing but it's worth the effort to get through, to get to the end and find out how it all wraps up. So it is worth picking up and powering through those. It is worth getting through like those like 4 or 5 books that are considered in that, in the slog. Okay, so I read the first book, I think when I was in junior high. I raided my brother's fantasy shelf and grabbed just the first kind of book that I found, and that was The Eye of the World. And that was my first introduction to the series. So I read the first book. At that point, didn't even realize that there were more books in the series. We only had one, and I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. As far as like all the books in the series, like, the first book actually has kind of a conclusion. It could stand as a standalone, almost. I mean, there's parts at the end that indicate, yes, this story continues. I guess maybe if it hadn't done very well, it could have ended there. And it's also a very traditional fantasy. Definitely has like Lord of the Rings vibe. It has the traditional farm boy, chosen one, that kind of setup for a fantasy novel. I was probably in high school, and I was at the bookstore, and I noticed, like, you know what, there's another book. And not only is there another book, I think there were a couple. So I purchased a second book. I purchased The Great Hunt. And of course, it had been a couple years since I'd read the first one, so going through it, I was kind of like playing catch up, like, oh, it's been a couple of years, I gotta try to remember who these characters are and what's going on, so it took me a minute to do that. Read the second book and thought, that this is kind of going in its own direction. And this clearly, there were other books out at that time, so it was obvious that there were going to be more. Once I saved up my money a little bit, I would go buy another Robert Jordan book, and I got through the third book. And the third book is The Dragon Reborn. That was kind of like the end of my high school. At the end of high school, I was done with like the first 3. And I was entering college, and I was thinking I was going to be really busy and studying and all that stuff. And I was like, I still like the series, but it's going to have to go on the back burner because life. I'm working on college, working real hard in college, and I'm one of those that is gung-ho, and I'm going to spend 20 hours studying a week, and then I've got classes, and then I've got work, and all that kind of stuff that you do in college that makes you crazy college person. And one of my roommates who was a friend of mine from, well, we've known each other since we were like 5, so we've been friends for a long time, gotten married, and she and her new husband was a big fan of the series, and he gave me the paperbacks to the next 3 books in the series. So we had The Shadow Rising, Fires of Heaven, and Lord of Chaos. And Path of Daggers wasn't written yet, but it had been announced that it was coming out, so I read those 3. And obviously, like Lord of Chaos, that's like, after that is kind of when the series slows down a little bit. And actually, like, the first half of Lord of Chaos, not a whole lot happens. But the second half, a whole lot happens. And I won't even say, like, there's lots and lots of setup in the first half. There's just not much going on. And so I got through Lord of Chaos. I thought it was great. I was like, okay, when Path of Daggers comes out, I'm definitely going to get it. I got to keep up with this series. So then, of course, life happens. At that point, like, I got married, and my husband was not a fan of the series because he didn't like that it wasn't finished. He didn't want to wait for books, which kind of turned out kind of strange because there was a series that he liked that is basically never going to end. But his fantasy series that he liked was Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. So I thought, well, I think at this point Path of Daggers had just come out, and I was waiting for the mass market paperback so that it would be a little bit cheaper. So I decided to read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Read that. It was a great series. Tad Williams is a really beautiful author. It was a couple of years before I picked up Path of Daggers, and I read Path of Daggers. And then, life happens. I ended up going to graduate school. I ended up having children. I ended up doing all of these things, and eventually that relationship ended. All I had were the books up through Path of Daggers. And it had been several years since I had picked up the series. My sister's boyfriend indicated that he was looking for a fantasy series. And at this point, I did not know that Robert Jordan had passed. And so I said, hey, pick up The Wheel of Time. This is one of those fantasy series that's been around forever, and Robert Jordan's still writing them. I've only read up through Path of Daggers. Go for it. So I lent him all of my Wheel of Time books, and after that, found out that Robert Jordan had passed. I hadn't read past Path of Daggers, and also at that point there was also an announcement that Brandon Sanderson was going to be finishing the series. So of course, me and my sister and her boyfriend, who were now big fans of the series, decided that we needed to pick up something by Brandon Sanderson to see if this was an author that we liked. So we read Mistborn, and obviously Mistborn is also a really great series, and like Mistborn quite a bit, and was like, okay, Brandon Sanderson can finish this series. So at this point, I still had not read past Path of Daggers. And I picked up the next book, and I started it, and I realized, like, I have no idea what's going on here. It has been so many years since I have read these other books that I don't know who these characters are. I don't know what's going on. I think probably I could have just pushed through it because I didn't realize that was also like the beginning of when the books really slow down and there's not near as much going on in them. I decided to start over. So I read the first 2, just kind of stopped at that point, decided like I wasn't at a point where I could pick up such a big series and finish it. And I kind of also wanted, I was following like when the books were coming out and everything, but I didn't purchase them or anything because I was only on, I was trying to reread them. And I kind of left it there for a while until 2019 when I got an Audible subscription and I thought, I am going to finish this series. So I got the first book on Audible and I was listening to it, and I'm not saying like the narrator was horrible or anything, it's just I didn't particularly like the narrator. I struggled to be able to listen to that and be engaged in it. Hi. Hi, Kiki. So anyway, so I struggled with the audiobook and decided, well, heck, I'm just gonna buy the series. I'm gonna read it. So I picked up the whole series, started from the beginning, read through the whole thing, finished it last year in December, just reading like one book a month. And then kind of at the end of the year, I just would read 2 because I just decided, like, I just need to get through this. I just need to finish it. And I'm really glad that I did. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought that for the most part, like, this was one of like the greatest fantasy series that I'd ever read. And when you read something that big, at the end you're like, whew, I feel accomplished. And I'm so glad that I stuck with it and I read the whole thing. And now I can join the throng of people who have read The Wheel of Time. So The Wheel of Time, I think, is now like one of a classic. I guess we can't really call it a classic. It's not old enough, but it is kind of an amazing, wonderful, epic fantasy story in a world where women control the magic, and so women are a little bit more. They have more power than men do. Men can have this magic too that they call the one power. However, if you're a man and you yield the one power, your fate is to go crazy and die and possibly kill everybody that you love, because the male half has been tainted. And it is very immersive. Like, there's really great descriptions of a world that is very different and yet very much the same as our own, and people who struggle and have the same struggles that we have. The Wheel of Time. An epic fantasy that will suck a lot of your life away. That is definitely worth the time to put into it and read it. And, you know, even if you just say, like, hey, this is a lot, maybe one book a month. But yeah, I certainly suggest you pick it up if you like fantasy and you're into fantasy. If you are excited about the show coming out, I am. And if it's not completely the same as the books, I'm okay with that, because most things aren't. Doesn't mean that it'll be horrible. Maybe I realize, like, there's a range. So anyway, that's my story about The Wheel of Time and how I finally finished The Wheel of Time. And now I'm obviously onto other fantasy series because that one's over. If you like this video, please hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks.